de 95.000 millones de dólares. Pero para entender un poco qué significa la OTAN, qué significan estas palabras, creo que no podemos tener un mejor invitado. Camila empezó su carrera desde muy temprano en la OTAN, desde el año 1980, y fue escalando y fue pasando por diferentes puestos. Fue director de planificación de políticas, fue subsecretario general adjunto para desafíos de seguridad, incluso fue el portavoz de la OTAN durante la guerra de Kosovo. Es el señor Jamie Shai, que nos atiende a esta hora desde el Reino Unido, o mejor dicho, desde Bruselas, Camila.
Mr. Shai, thank you so much for being with us. Welcome to Blue Radio.
Thank you very much for having me. A pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Shai. Lo va a preguntar al señor Shai, Gonzalo, que yo creo que es lo primero que hay que preguntarle es ¿por qué son tan delicadas las declaraciones del expresidente Donald Trump sobre la OTAN y para la seguridad del mundo? Mr. Shai, the first question I think it's important to answer is why Donald Trump's statements on Saturday about NATO are so delicate for the world's security.
Well, I think for two reasons. The first one is because this time Trump really has gone too far. I mean, his criticisms of NATO, of burden sharing within NATO, the defence spending of the European allies, those criticisms are well known, and in some cases they are justified because not a majority of NATO countries meet the commitment to spend 2% of their GDP on defence. But it's one thing to criticise allies for inadequate defence spending. It's another thing to say that the United States will not play its leadership role any longer. The United States will not keep its NATO commitment to defend the allies. And then finally to say that he invites Russia, Putin, to attack those NATO countries, which would be the majority of them, that are not meeting their defense requirements. He also sort of says this in a way that suggests that somehow the allies have to pay this money directly to the United States as kind of protection money. And that is not the way that NATO works. So I think it's because Trump this time has gone a step too far that European allies have expressed alarm.
Mr. Shia, allow us to translate your answer. Lucas, ¿qué dice el señor Shia sobre por qué es un peligro y es tan delicado lo que dijo el expresidente Donald Trump sobre la OTAN este fin de semana?
Camila, lo que nos dice el ex portavoz es que, digamos, Donald Trump ha ido muy lejos en sus críticas a la OTAN. Primero, porque una cosa es criticar, digamos, el reparto de cargas dentro de la OTAN, que algunos no estén aportando ese 2% del PIB que deben aportar, pero que otra muy diferente es, digamos, amenazar con que Estados Unidos vaya a quitar y no vaya a tener ese liderazgo dentro de la OTAN e incluso amenazar con que va a impulsar a Rusia con, digamos, atacar y alentar a Rusia a atacar, y pues que esto finalmente ya ha ido demasiado lejos.
Pero entonces yo quisiera preguntarle a nuestro invitado si él cree que lo que dijo Donald Trump, más allá de la preocupación, es un simple bluff. Don Jamie, do you believe that the Trump words are a bluff? Are a joke?
Well, no, I don't believe they're a bluff because Trump has made his animosity towards NATO very clear during his first term, and also his animosity towards the European Union, the other great project to build peace and integration in Europe, which he described as a threat and wanted to cut trade relations with the EU. There are also reports from Washington that this time round he's going to surround himself with a lot of yes people who won't dare to challenge him. There won't be the adults in the room, as we called them, who were there last time, those experienced foreign policy professionals who were able to restrain Trump from extreme actions. And so if you're NATO, you hope that it's bluff, but you can't be totally assured that it's bluff. And the other thing is that we are now in a completely different geopolitical situation from the one that we were in the last time Trump was president. At that time, Russia had not invaded Ukraine. We didn't have the kind of tensions between Russia and NATO that we have today. There was not the same perception by NATO of a threat from Russia that we have today. So to make those remarks in the current geopolitical context, you could well read them as a sign of Western weakness, a lack of resolve, could undermine NATO's deterrence.
Lucas, ¿qué nos dice el ex portavoz de la OTAN, Don Jamie, como le dice Gonzalo Lázari, a su pregunta de si Trump está blofeando o no con este tema de la OTAN?
Nos dice que no, que él no cree que sea un bluff, que de hecho él ha expresado pues en muchas ocasiones de su primer mandato como esa animosidad contra la OTAN e incluso animosidad hacia la Unión Europea, que incluso amenazó con cortar las relaciones comerciales y que en su momento expertos en política exterior pudieron frenar a Donald Trump, pero que en este momento si comparamos el primer mandato de Trump versus lo que sería un segundo mandato, si llegara a ganar las elecciones, pues es una situación geopolítica completamente diferente, incluyendo pues que por supuesto en el primer mandato Rusia no había invadido Ucrania y pues todos los conflictos que hay actualmente, así que pues él esperaría que si eres de la OTAN uno diría que ojalá fuera un bluff, pero que él no cree que sea así.
Igual es interesante preguntarle al señor Jamie si es verdad que hay miembros de la OTAN que no pagan su contribución o su membresía para la OTAN y cuáles serían esos países. Mr. Jamie, anyway, is former President Trump right in some way that there are some NATO members that do not pay this kind of obligation or membership, and in this case, which countries don't pay these contributions?
Well, he's right to the extent that only 11 out of the 31 current NATO member states are meeting their commitment to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. This was an agreement that NATO made back in 2014, soon after Russia annexed Crimea, that part of Ukraine that juts out into the Black Sea. But this was not something that the United States imposed on NATO. This was a commitment that was freely accepted by all of the allies. But what Trump is overlooking is that the Europeans do a lot to help international security. And you have to look at the big picture. For example, nearly all allies have increased their defence budgets very significantly. Germany has agreed to spend an extra 1 billion euros on defence. So everybody is moving in the right direction, even if they are not yet at that 2% mark. That's the first thing. Secondly, the Europeans have spent twice as much as the United States on assistance to Ukraine. Thirdly, the Europeans paid a lion's share of UN peacekeeping and a lot of other international stability missions around the world that help the United States. They've also been with the United States in difficult times in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. So to pretend that somehow the Europeans are delinquent allies and America is doing everything by itself is simply not true.
Camila nos dice pues que Donald Trump sí tiene razón al decir que solo 11 de los 31 miembros están cumpliendo ese compromiso de gastar el 2% del PIB en defensa, pero que este fue un acuerdo hecho en 2014, poco después de la anexión de Crimea por parte de Rusia, y que esto no fue impuesto como tal por los Estados Unidos, sino que fue un acuerdo al que llegaron todos los miembros. También dice que Europa ha gastado el doble en asistencia a Ucrania y que como tal decir que Estados Unidos está haciendo todo por sí solo, simplemente pues esto no es cierto.
Tengo una pregunta para el señor Shea. Mr. Shea, after this statement from Donald Trump, what could be the consequences if he is elected again? En ese sentido le estoy preguntando si él es elegido otra vez, pues cuáles serían las consecuencias.
Well, that's obviously a good question. And of course, I have to sort of look into my crystal ball a little bit for this and speculate. But obviously, times will not be easy for NATO because not only has Trump said that he would sort of refuse to defend those allies not spending enough in his view, which would obviously undermine NATO's credibility, which is all important. But he's also said that he would stop US military assistance to Ukraine. That would mean that Putin has a good chance now of conquering all of Ukraine, and that then Russian troops would be on the border with NATO, which would, of course, be a tremendous failure for Western policy after all of the transatlantic effort these last 2 years to keep Ukraine in the fight. Now, would Trump carry through on all of these threats? It's difficult to say. The Americans have got a lot of troops in Europe, 100,000, a lot of real estate in Europe. It's not going to be so easy for Trump to disentangle the United States from NATO after 75 years of NATO's existence. Secondly, it also has to be pointed out that the US Congress, including the Republicans in Congress, have passed laws making it illegal for Trump to withdraw from NATO unilaterally without the consent of the Senate, which ratified the treaty. So there is some resistance, including within Trump's own Republican ranks, to that kind of dramatic move. But in all, I think this is a wake-up call for the Europeans that the days of a predictable American leader in the alliance are probably over. Times are going to be difficult. The US has got interest now in the Middle East, interest in the Indo-Pacific, and the wake-up call is this is the moment for Europe to start taking its defense seriously and taking its destiny in its own hands. It has the economic resources to do this. It simply lacks the political will.
Bueno, Ana nos dice que para esto tiene que especular un poco y sacar su bola de cristal, pero que sin duda cree que no van a ser tiempos fáciles para la OTAN, porque pues Trump ya ha dicho que en caso de ganar no defendería a los aliados, lo que esto implicaría pues que se socavaría un poco la credibilidad de la OTAN. Ha dicho también que va a detener la asistencia militar de Estados Unidos a Ucrania, lo que para él implica que Putin puede tener éxito en la invasión a Ucrania, lo que sería por supuesto un gran fracaso para la política occidental de los últimos años. También dice que no va a ser fácil para Trump poder desmontar 75 años de existencia de la OTAN y que incluso para esto va a necesitar el consentimiento del Senado y que hay resistencia incluso dentro de las filas, por supuesto no solo demócratas, sino republicanas, pero pues también dice que son tiempos difíciles para Estados Unidos porque no solo está interesado en Rusia y en Ucrania, sino también en el Medio Oriente y en el Indo-Pacífico.
De todos modos, pues ya varios mandatarios o líderes de la OTAN han dicho tenemos que ver qué hacemos en caso de que Trump sea reelegido. Por eso mi pregunta para el señor Shia es ¿qué deberían estar en este momento haciendo los países de la OTAN para prepararse en caso de que Trump sea reelegido? Mr. Shia, what should NATO countries be doing to prepare in case Trump wins again the election?
Well, I think the first thing, of course, is to demonstrate to the American public opinion, again to the Republicans, if not to Trump himself, that the Europeans are taking the imbalance in defense spending seriously. Defense budgets are going up. Since 2014, the Europeans have added 300 billion euros. That's not nothing to their common defense budgets. Europe is rearming. Yesterday, for example, the German Chancellor opened a new factory in Germany to produce artillery ammunition. The Europeans have been common financing, weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Poland, for example, is spending 4% of its GDP on defense now, is doubling its army. So the idea that the Europeans are simply lying down and doing nothing is completely wrong. Things are moving in Europe, and we should see that sometimes the glass is half full rather than half empty. So number one, I think the Europeans need to do a better communications job in the United States to correct this kind of idea that somehow they are sitting back and depending totally on American help. That would help. Secondly, it's to start preparing for less American commitment and American involvement. Even if Joe Biden wins the election, the US would still be hard pushed to finance aid to Ukraine at the same level as previously, and the Europeans therefore have got to look very seriously at why they are so weak in defence, although the EU is a very strong economic institution, and start thinking about how they can be more self-reliant by combining their units, by producing weapons together, by spending their money smarter. It's not a question of doing without the United States, but preparing, of course, for a scenario where Europe would have to defend itself by its own means.
Nos dice el señor Shea que lo primero es que los europeos tienen que demostrarle al pueblo estadounidense y sobre todo a los republicanos que los europeos sí están tomando en serio ese desequilibrio en el gasto de defensa, que están aumentando los presupuestos desde el 2014 y que han añadido incluso cerca de 300 billones de euros. Pone como ejemplo incluso que ayer Alemania abrió una nueva fábrica de artillería para fabricar armas. Dice también que las cosas sí se están moviendo en Europa y que a veces vemos el vaso medio lleno o medio vacío, por lo cual es importante que Europa se esfuerce en mejorar esa comunicación para corregir la idea en Estados Unidos de que ellos están sentados esperando y dependiendo de Estados Unidos. Incluso también dice que hay que ser realistas y que incluso si no gana Trump, sino que gana Joe Biden, va a ser difícil poder impulsar nuevos proyectos y nuevos proyectos de ley que impulsen la ayuda a Ucrania, y pues que Europa tiene que sentarse a analizar por qué están siendo un poco débiles en defensa y cómo deben ser más autosuficientes.
Tengo una última pregunta para el señor Shia o Shea. Ahora le preguntamos cómo se pronuncia su apellido, y es: si esto pasa, si Trump gana y se debilita la OTAN, ¿Cómo cambiaría el mundo? I have a last question for you, Mr. Xi or Mr. Shea. You will tell us how you pronounce your last name because as you can tell, we are not English native speakers. But if this happens, if Trump wins, how would the world change?
First of all, don't worry about my name. Many native speakers get my name wrong as well. And you certainly are doing better with my name than I would do with your names. But no, thank you. No, let's see this frankly. I mean, Trump is somebody who believes in following America's sort of immediate sort of national interests first and foremost, make America great again. He's protectionist, of course, in his trade policy. Although the Biden administration has been protectionist, it has to be said, in many aspects. He would put the focus very much on China as the major threat to the United States. But then there's a contradiction here because Russia and China are increasingly allied, and China is helping Russia in Ukraine with weapons and technology. So it's very difficult to see how Trump could be friendly to Russia and at the same time hostile to China. I think that, like many American presidents, he will discover before too long that to be secure in the world, America needs allies, America needs friends. It can't go it alone. It needs to share the burden, which is what Trump is always saying, share the burden. And that if America wants people to go to Afghanistan with it, or to go to Iraq with it, or to go to Africa with it, or go to the Middle East, it's not the Japanese, it's not the Koreans, it's not the New Zealanders, it's not the Indians who are there, it's always the NATO allies. So America in NATO defends Europe, but in return gets allies. Look at the Middle East at the moment that help America. So I think that, Winston Churchill once said you can always rely upon the United States to do the right thing after doing all the wrong things. And I think that, for a Trump, a second administration, there would be that learning curve to go through as well.
Well, Mr. Jamie, Shia or Shea? How should I pronounce your last name?
It's Shea. Thank you very
Shea.
much.
Mr. Shea, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here in Blue Radio. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure for me.
¿Qué nos decía entonces el ex portavoz de la OTAN desde el Reino Unido, Mr.